All right, in the last demonstration, part 1 of WordPress installation, we had gone ahead and uploaded our files to the file system, and that would be the WordPress installation files that you downloaded from wordpress.org. All right, so we've got that up there, and we renamed it. We renamed the WordPress folder as SD Places. All right, so that's the first thing you need to do. The second thing you need to do is set up the database and the database user. You can close the file manager actually, and let's go back to the main cPanel. What you're going to do is scroll down until you get to the databases section of your cPanel, and go ahead and click on MySQL Database Wizard. Now, the first thing you're going to see here is that you'll notice that it has a prefix to the new database name that it's going to create, and it's based on your account. All right, so my account is student, so it's going to create student underscore and then whatever the name of the database is. So you can name the database whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and name mine SD Places because that's what my website's going to be. If yours were like, let's say, a portfolio, you could call it portfolio, right? And so on. I'm going to click next step, and it's going to automatically then ask me to create a database user. And this user is going to have specific privileges to access the database that you just created. All right, so that's something that is a little bit confusing sometimes to people at first, is that you're going to find that there are all these different user accounts and passwords and things like that. I want to make sure that you understand that this database user is not the same as, for instance, the user account that you use to get into your FTP, like to log in via FTP or something like that. Totally different. This database user is going to be stored in the MySQL database records as a user that has access to use specific databases. All right, so anyway, and I'll reiterate that throughout the process as we encounter some other things that might be confusing later. But anyway, we're going to create a database user that has access to use that database. And to keep things really simple and straightforward, I'm going to make that user the same name as the database. So I called the database student underscore SD places. So I'm going to create the database user as student underscore SD places. That might make it a little bit simpler. Now for the password, you're going to want to use a strong password, and it'll tell you down here whether your password is weak or not, and it should be at least a strength of 60 or higher, preferably higher, all right? But one thing that is really important to understand that you need to remember is that this password is actually going to be stored in a file that is in your WordPress configuration files on the server. So for instance, if we were to go back to that file manager, there is a file in there that is going to be generated called wp-config.php, and your information with your database name and your database user and that user's password, those things are all going to be stored inside of a file. And if anyone were to ever hijack that file, they would be able to see what the name of that user and database and password would be, so that they could hack into your database. And so what's really important is that you don't use the same password here that you would normally use, like to log into your main cPanel account, or that you would use to, get in through FTP or whatever, because that's basically giving the complete keys to the kingdom, right? You don't want to do that. What you really want to do is make sure you use a strong password here that is separate from the password for, let's say, your cPanel account or for your FTP or whatever. All right, now in that case, in your case, it probably happens to be exactly the same thing in terms of FTP and cPanel account user information. But there are cases where that won't always be the truth, right? So if you want to figure out how to generate something that's strong, you don't, and I also, because it is going to be stored in a file on the server that I have access to, please don't use an account, some important account's password, like for banking or for your email. Like I really don't need access to that. I don't want access to that. Nobody else should have access to that, right? So make this something, if you need to put it in a password keeper, or you need to just, keep it somewhere stored on your computer so you don't forget it, that's fine. So if you're not sure how to generate strong passwords, you can go to strong password generator, right? It's one of my first hits here, and you can click on that and you can use this tool or some other tool, right, to generate passwords. You can show options. If you want to be able to, see, you can click. This is like a crazy password, so you might want to show options and then say, all right, well, I want it to be a phonetic word, and then you can generate the password again, right? Or you could take out punctuation, for instance, and you could avoid punctuation that's used in programming and avoid similar characters, right? And you can click that, and that might be a little bit easier, right, to understand or look at, right? And so you can copy that password, right? And let's come back over here, and I'm going to paste that password here, paste it here, and it tells me it's very strong. Now, the other thing before I keep going, right, this is important, is I'm going to open a text file and I'm going to save this information somewhere. So I'm going to open up a new file, right, and I'm going to go ahead and write down database name, all right, and we're going to do database user, okay, and then we're going to say database user password, or PWD for password, and I'm going to paste this password right here, okay. And actually, let me come down here, and I'm also going to say host name. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and paste my password here, and if you remember, the name of my database was student_SD places. All right, and I'm going to copy that because I made the database username exactly the same. And then for host name, it is going to be localhost, and I'll get to that in a minute. But go ahead and make a note of this, and you're going to go ahead and save this file somewhere. It's important that you save this so that you don't forget later. And even if it's just for this project and you think, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, this is something that you should always do for real projects. Always. All right. And ideally, you'd want to be keeping this stuff in some sort of password keeper. If you're not sure about good password keepers, like on a Mac, Pastor is a really good one. I don't know if they make that for Windows, but there are tons of them out there, right? So anyway, we're going to go over here and now create the user. Okay, and then it's going to ask me, what privileges do I want to give the user student_SD places to have on the database of student_SD places. I'm going to give it all privileges. All right, now you might be wondering, like, why would I want to limit privileges? Well, a lot of times there are databases, there are things that people will make, and whenever they're creating web applications, where certain users will have different kinds of permissions to use databases. Like when you log in, some users will have access to make changes, and other users will only have the permission to read. But in this case, because this is a WordPress installation, we need the main user for the entire WordPress installation to have all privileges, period. Okay, so click Next Step. And it goes ahead and it tells you, that you've completed that task. You could add another database and so on and so on. You can go here where it says return to MySQL databases. And what it does is it allows you to look at what you currently have. And so you could create a new database and go through that process again. Or you can look at the current databases that you have, right? So, and you could also repair if you think it's broken or messed up. You can check the database if you think it's broken or messed up. And then down below, it'll say what your current databases are. And right now, you only have the ability to have up to 5 on this server. So that's the limit that I gave you. In future classes, it might even be fewer or more, who knows. But at the time of this video, you have up to 5 options for databases. If you rename it now, it's okay, but if you rename it later, it's not. Once you're using it, you'd have to go and make a bunch of modifications. But I would just leave it the way it is. And you can also create additional users. You can have multiple database users that have permission to use the same database. Like I said before, some databases are designed in such a way to work with web applications where one database user has permission to do everything while another one has the permission only to read the records. But that's not the case in this WordPress stuff, right? We're going to have one user that can do everything. Okay. And you can also, like if for some reason you did this differently and you created your database not using the wizard, and let's say that you just created a database and then separately as a different process you created a database user, you might have to come down here and add the user to the database to give it privileges like we already did. All right, and then it tells you down here what the current database users are. All right, and you can change the password if necessary and so forth. Okay. All right, so if we go back to our regular home for the cPanel, I want to show you the page that we were just looking at would actually be where it says MySQL databases. The first link that we clicked was MySQL database wizard, but then when we were finished, it dropped us back into MySQL databases. So if you ever needed to get back there to look at what you've got, you could click on this MySQL databases link and it takes you to what I just showed you. Okay. All right, now let's go back to our home. And what I want to show you now is what that looks like, what that database currently looks like in this little tool right here called phpMyAdmin. If you click on that, what it'll do is it loads this application. The thing that's nice about phpMyAdmin is that it's this really nice web graphical user interface that allows you to connect to the MySQL service and read all the information about your different databases and users and all that kind of stuff, so that you don't have to do it through the command line. MySQL as a service has its own special command line, so you would have to go into like the terminal or some sort of console, and you would have to understand how to issue all those commands. But this prevents you from having to know all of that stuff. And so this is what we're going to use. And the reason we're going to use it also is because it is the most widely used interface to connect to MySQL pretty much across all servers. I have yet to see any server, any hosting solution that I have ever used or I've ever seen other people use that does not have access to phpMyAdmin as at least one of the main default ways of connecting to the MySQL service and issuing commands and seeing your databases and all its tables and stuff. All right, so now that we're here, first of all, I want to show you something. Over on the left, you see that we've got that student underscore SD places, or whatever you happen to call yours. Yours would be probably your last name or whatever your account name is, underscore, and then the name of your database that you called it. And if you click on that, it'll actually change up here. You see right here where it says server, it says localhost. That tells you the host name of the server that the MySQL service is using. All right, this isn't the same host name, for instance, that the web service is using. So like for instance, this I've oftentimes will refer to this as the host name, for your class server account. But whenever we start talking about the database stuff, right, then the way that it's connecting, you see that it's connecting on port 3306 on localhost. Remember back to the conversation that we've had before about how all computers, like including servers that are up in the cloud and stuff, they all have a loopback address of 127.0.0.1, and they almost all will in some way, shape, or form refer to themselves as a localhost. Well, this particular server, this cloud server, allows itself to connect on 3306 port using the host name of localhost. All right, some servers that you use in different hosts, like if you go and get hosting somewhere else, well, some of them are going to have some crazy long host name here that is for the database hosting. But in this particular case, localhost is what you're going to use. Don't be confused and think it somehow the same computer or the same server as your own development computer. Like if you, for instance, are using your own laptop and you've set it up as what we've been referring to all semester as a localhost computer, don't let this confuse you. This is just this particular cloud server's way of referring to itself, okay? So earlier, whenever I told you, hey, when you're writing down your database information using the database name, database username, and password, I said also go ahead and make the host name localhost. Well, this is what I was referring to. And now you see it's using the database called student SD places. So originally it was just, if I click right up here in this breadcrumb trail, it says server localhost. This might look a little different on a different server if in the future we're looking at this, but basically this is the home base kind of where it says like localhost or whatever the host name is. All right, and then if you click on the left, if you click on the database name, it's issuing basically a command to the MySQL service that's called the use command. So it's saying use student SD places, and then it goes into that database, right? So right now you'll see it says create tables, and it said no tables are found in the database. Well, that's because all we did so far was we created an empty database, like an empty shell. And what we're going to do in the next set of tutorials is we're going to go into the web interface and we're going to use the files to go ahead and automatically generate our site and create tables and populate those tables. So far what we've done in the first demo is we uploaded the files to the file system, right? So all of those PHP files and things like that, right, to the file system. And in this demo, the second demo, what I just showed you how to do was to create the empty database with a database user that has permission to use the database, okay? So in the next demo, I'm going to show you how you can start to populate your WordPress installations database.